So we're starting on week 9A. We're talking about Everyone's an Author, chapter 28. We're talking about quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing in academic writing. In academic writing, establishing your credibility is essential, and one of the best ways to do this is by consulting and integrating authoritative sources. Using these sources demonstrates that you've researched your topic thoroughly. Credit those whose ideas you've relied on, and enhances your authority as a writer. However, integrating other voices with your own is a delicate process. Today, we'll focus on 3 key strategies for doing this effectively: quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing. The challenges for academic writers is balancing the voices of experts with your own. It's important to ensure that the sources you use don't overshadow your argument. The key questions to keep in mind are: how do you decide which parts of a source to include? How do you condense complex ideas without distorting the author's original meaning? And how do you weave these sources into your own writing seamlessly? Let's break down the 3 primary methods of incorporating sources. 1. Quoting. When to quote. Quoting involves using the exact words from a source. You might choose to quote when a source expresses something so well that it's worth repeating exactly. The idea is complex and paraphrasing could distort the meaning. An expert's words help to bolster your own authority on the topic. You're analyzing a passage directly, so you need the exact wording. And you're presenting a counter-argument and want to represent it accurately. For example, quoting an authority like Martin Luther King Jr. might lend power to an argument about civil rights. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. These are words we quote directly because paraphrasing them might dilute the impact. Introducing quotations properly. Always introduce quotes with context and follow them with an explanation of their relevance to your point. For example, as Martin Luther King Jr. argued, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. A reminder that local injustices often have global repercussions. And then we have short verse long quotations. Short quotations, fewer than 4 lines in MLA or 40 words in APA, should be incorporated into the text with quotation marks. And then long quotations, I think I've written this on some of your papers, over 4 lines in MLA or 40 words in APA are formatted as block quotations, and they're indented from the rest of the text without quotation marks. Be sure to still introduce them and explain their relevance. Modifying quotations. Sometimes you may need to change a word or omit parts of a quotation to fit your sentence. Use brackets for changes or clarifications and ellipses to show omitted text. Be careful not to change the author's original meaning, as this could misrepresent their work and damage your credibility. Examples of ellipses and brackets. In the speech, King stated freedom must be demanded by the oppressed. It cannot be given by the oppressor. Quoting within a quote. To quote something inside a quotation, use single quotation marks within the double quotation marks. For instance, in his speech, King famously said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Paraphrasing. When to paraphrase. Paraphrasing involves restating the information from a source in your own words. You might choose to paraphrase when the details are important, but the exact wording isn't necessary. The original passage is too technical or complex for your readers, or you want to maintain your own voice but still convey essential information. The balance of paraphrasing. A good paraphrase should be about the same length as the original, but it should be written entirely in your own words and sentence structure. Merely swapping out a few words can lead to unintentional plagiarism, even if you cite the source. You must change both the vocabulary and the structure. Paraphrasing pitfalls to avoid. Something that is too close to the original. Simply rewording the original text without changing sentence structure is insufficient. And then too distant from the original. If you leave out too many details, you risk misrepresenting the author's intent. Examples of a proper paraphrase. Original. The increase in greenhouse gas emissions has contributed significantly to the acceleration of global climate change. Paraphrase. The rise in greenhouse gases has played a major role in speeding up climate change. Even though you're using your own words, you still need to cite the source. I think my helpful hint for this particular idea paraphrasing is if you do 2 different days, let's say that you are working on your paper and one day you do all your research, okay? So then the next day you come back and you try to paraphrase things without looking at the source again, if that makes sense. So essentially what you're trying to do is like write it in your own words, right? So to do that, you want to not look at what you originally wrote, or excuse me, you don't want to look at the source, the original source. You want to come back to it a day later and retry to write it, right? So that way you're not like looking at it directly, you're trying to write from what you have remembered over the last couple of days, and that's going to keep you from like plagiarizing essentially, because what you write after a day or two after looking at something is going to be a lot different than what you write just that day, right? Like if you're just like looking at it immediately, I have a hard time with that, or I used to have a harder time with that. Like I'm looking at something, I'm trying to write it in my own words, and it's really difficult because you are like actively looking at it, right? So if you're not actively looking at it, if it's been a day or two, so sometimes again, it's helpful to stagger your writing process over a few different days so that you don't run into that issue. So you can like do some research, think about it, and then come back and try to write what you're talking about. Summarizing. When to summarize? Summarizing condenses the main ideas of a source into a much shorter form. You summarize when you only need the main point of a lengthy passage and the details are non-relevant to your argument. You're dealing with an entire book, article, or chapter and want to provide a brief overview. Summary pitfalls. A summary can go wrong if it misrepresents the original point, or it includes too many details, making it unnecessarily long. It's too vague, leaving readers unclear about the source's main idea. Example of summarizing. The original, lengthy. The environmental impacts of deforestation have been well documented. From the destruction of ecosystems to the contribution of carbon dioxide emissions, deforestation remains one of the largest drivers of global climate change. In summary, deforestation is a major contributor to climate change due to its environmental impacts and carbon emissions. Incorporating source materials effectively. Regardless of whether you quote, paraphrase, or summarize, you need to do more than just insert someone else's words or ideas. You are the author, and it's your job to show how the source material connects to your argument. Never assume that sources speak for themselves. Always provide context and commentary. Signal phrases. Use signal phrases to introduce the source material, such as, according to climate researcher John Doe. Signal phrases help distinguish source's voice from your own. And then choosing the right verb. Be mindful of the verb you choose to use as your signal phrase. Words like claims, argues, or suggests can help convey the source's attitude. For example, Doe argues that deforestation is the leading cause of climate change. And then proper documentation. No matter how you incorporate source material, it's crucial for you to credit the original author through parenthetical documentation or in-text citations. For MLA, you'll always include the page number in the citations. For APA, page numbers are optional for paraphrases, but always include them for direct quotes. And then we got incorporating visual and audio sources. In addition to text, you may sometimes include visual or audio material like tables, charts, photos, or video clips. These also need to be introduced, explained, and documented just like quotations. You can do this for tables. Should be labeled and titled with a source provided below. And then figures, photos, graphs, maps should be numbered and captioned with a source indicated. And then with audio and video links, should be embedded or referenced with appropriate citations included. To summarize, quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing are essential tools in academic writing. They allow you to draw on the authority of others while maintaining your own voice. Remember, how you introduce, integrate, and credit these sources is just as important as the information they provide. Use these techniques strategically to strengthen your writing, and always ensure that your sources complement your argument rather than overpower it. Everyone's an author, chapter 13. So our next essay is the argumentative essay, and I know we're just finishing our rhetorical essays, but we got 2 weeks until our argumentative rough drafts are due. I think that, and I've been saying this for the last couple weeks, people have less of a problem with the argumentative essay. I think we all kind of like just understand how to argue, right? And it's maybe not, I don't want to say easy enough to choose something that we're passionate about and argue about it either way, right? Either we're for it or against it. So that's really all the next assignment is. But today, in the next couple weeks, we're going to be talking a little bit more about arguing and making really good arguments, which is something you can use in your everyday life, right? You know, arguing really good, always a really, really good skill to have, right? Arguing a position. Arguing a position means clearly stating your stance on an issue, supporting it with evidence, and addressing opposing views. It's done across various fields, media, and cultures. And how you argue often depends on your context, audience, and medium. Across academic disciplines. Position papers are common across fields like philosophy, where they express a specific opinion or an issue or philosopher's viewpoint. Many college courses ask students to write position papers in response to course readings. The challenge is understanding the specific expectations of the field or discipline you're writing for. Across media. Different media offers different resources and challenges for presenting your position. Persuasion is about connecting with your audience, meeting them where they are, and showing why your position matters. Consider how your audience consumes information and what medium will best reach them. Across cultures and communities. Taking a position in cultures or communities different from your own can present unique challenges. For example, Pepsi's attempt to enter the Chinese market resulted in a mistranslation. Their slogan, Pepsi brings you back to life, was translated to Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the grave. In some cultures, it's appropriate to hint at your position rather than state it directly. In others, you're expected to state your position forthrightly without worrying about offending others. Bet that person at Pepsi lost their job that day. That's not good. Across genres, arguing a position can happen in everyday contexts and in many genres. For examples, writing a letter to the editor, a company's annual report, a movie review, etc. Every position-based writing has key features, but each genre handles them differently. Characteristic features of position papers. 1. Explicit position. Right? How do you feel about this one way or the other? That's typically, you've got to state that. I feel this way about this topic, or I feel this way about this topic, right? It's only one way or the other. Response to what others have said. Position papers are part of an ongoing conversation. I think it's important to note here that you could probably go about a position paper like this in either way, that you're either looking at something positively, right? Like you're like, here are all the positive things people have said about this idea. Or you can like go at the whole thing. You can argue against points people have made throughout, if that makes sense. Like you can take a whole bunch of points of things that you just don't agree with, and you can argue them point by point throughout your paper. And I've often found that's like a really good way. Like I've been saying since the beginning of the class, I personally think it's a lot easier to write about things that you don't agree with. A lot easier than just as like, hey, I just agree with this. It's a lot easier to be like, hey, I don't agree with this for these 5 reasons, right? So a lot of times it might be just easier to pick a bunch of reasons like why you don't agree with somebody, like choose a bunch of quotes that you don't agree with and then write why you don't agree with those quotes. And you're going to get a lot more material that way, right? You're going to just have a lot stronger paper because you're more passionate about what you don't believe with or what you don't agree with than what you do. Useful background information. Provide relevant background to help your audience understand your arguments. Again, we've been talking about this the whole semester, right? But it's important to let people know the background information before you start. Just assume that whoever is reading your paper doesn't know anything about the topic that you're talking about, right? A clear indication of why the topic matters. Show your audience why they should care. I think this is a little bit more difficult, but why should somebody care? Again, why do you care about it? I think that's a pretty good way to start, right? Tell people why you care about it, why they should care. Good reasons and evidence. Your position is only as strong as your supporting reasons and evidence. This is why, again, I've been saying since the beginning of the semester, I like to use a lot of quotes when I write, especially a paper like this. I'd probably use almost a quote, a paragraph, just because this is going to be your supporting reason. This is going to be your evidence, right? If you use a lot of quotes, you'll have a lot of evidence from experts, probably. And then you can just argue with those experts throughout your paper, right? You can disagree with them. At least that's probably what I would do. And then attention to multiple viewpoints. Address other viewpoints to show you've considered the issue fully. And I know I've been saying here this whole time you can argue with the expert in the alternative, but you should also have the opposing viewpoint in there as well, right? So if you really disagree, like if you're going to go with what I'm talking about, pick a bunch of like experts you disagree with, tell them why you disagree with them in your paper, right? Try to explain them in a negative. Then you'd have to have the positive as well, right? Basically, we just want to have a counter argument why the other side could be right, if that makes sense. Like what positive arguments do they make? And I think here for me, I think one of the hardest ones is global warming. Like there's not really like a lot of like great, like what's the counter argument for global warming? As far as I'm concerned, there's not great ones. And I suppose now that I think about it, we could probably say stuff like, like job loss, economic loss. We could probably talk about those type of issues, and we could look it up from that perspective of like the money people would lose if we like don't consider using more fossil fuels and what that would look like for the economy and whatnot. And that would probably have to be the counter argument to that. But so again, it's just important. There's always a counter argument to every side. And it might be a little bit harder depending on what you guys choose to think about. But an authoritative tone, establish credibility and be persuasive. And then appeal to values. Tap into your audience's values to strengthen your argument. An explicit position. Stating your position clearly is crucial, but don't drown it in qualifications. Be sure to balance clarity with acknowledging the complexity of the issue. Again, just state how you feel about something one way or the other, right? A response to what others have said or done. Position papers respond to others. They're motivated by previous discussions, ideas, or events. You may be addressing something already said or done, building upon it, or disagreeing with it. And then useful background information. The amount of background needed depends on your topic and audience. In academic contexts, more detailed background is often required to ground your discussion. Again, I would say that's like a large part. If nobody knows what you're talking about, your argument won't make sense either way, right? Like it's just really important to have all of that like detailed background information to show the reader why they should care, A, and B, like what you're even going to talk about going forward. It just is like, you just can't assume that people know about everything when they're reading your paper, right? They know explicitly what you care about and what you're interested in. A lot of the times they won't, right? And I know I'm your primary audience for these, and I know mostly everything, but not quite everything, right? So just be sure to give me a lot of information about things because I need it sometimes too, right? And Slash is a good way to write more about your paper. Give me all the information that you think is relevant that I would need to know to care about something one way or the other. A clear indication of why the topic matters. One of your goals is to show why the issue is important. Don't assume your audience will see why it matters without explanation. If you've been assigned a topic, find a way to make it interesting for yourself and your audience. Again, I'm not assigning you a topic here. I think in the handout I have for this, that there's ideas that you could use for an argumentative paper, but like all the other assignments in this class, for me, I want you to choose something you're passionate about more so than I want to assign you something, right? So yeah, choose something you're passionate about, and I'm sure you won't have a problem of indicating why that topic matters. Good reasons and evidence. Support your position with the best reasons and evidence possible. Evidence can come in many forms: facts, interviews, experiments, historical data, statistics, and personal experiences, etc. Again, there's always a good amount of evidence to be used. One thing I would suggest to stay away from here, or at least mostly, is personal experiences. That's like typically not what you're looking for in a, academic paper, is like your personal ideas and experiences about a topic. That being said, I don't mind if you have like maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs about that. But if your whole paper is just like, this is my opinion, it becomes less of like an argumentative. That's been a hard one. A lot of people worked in healthcare that I grade papers for, and a lot of times their papers are about healthcare and their experiences and what they think one way or the other. And I think that is like sometimes difficult for them, because like they've got all that firsthand experience, and that is great. And I've gotten a lot better at being like, hey, you can include some of this, but too much of that can like really like dilute what you're talking about, right? It's going to be like based on a lot of expert opinion and not so much like, hey, this is just what I think. Attention to more than one point of view. A strong position paper acknowledges and responds to multiple viewpoints. By considering opposing views, you show respect for the complexity of the issue and strengthen your argument. I always look at this one from the legal perspective, right? I went to law school. You have to include a counter argument, essentially because the opposing lawyer is going to argue against you. So you kind of have to like think ahead of like what the other person will say about what you're talking about. Anybody in here see 8 Mile? Know what I'm talking about? When he like at the end he just like raps against himself basically, and that's what I always think about here is like, what's your counter argument? And if you can like expose the other person's whole counter argument, it makes your argument a lot stronger, right? Just as like, this is what this other person's going to say, and this is why they're wrong about that. And that's just always a good way to look at that. An authoritative tone and stance. Academic writing often requires an authoritative tone. Even if you're examining multiple alternatives, you should maintain authority in your analysis. Be reasonable and rational even when taking a strong position. And I know I talked about this a lot like towards the beginning of the class, but I think it's really important in this essay particularly, is like not using so many I statements, right? Don't say like I think this or like I feel this way. It's like, again, I know we talked about it, I had a whole lecture on it towards the beginning of the class, but like we shouldn't be using those basically at all as far as I'm concerned, and especially in this one. So just try to stay away from like I feel like for various reasons. And you can just get rid of those. It's like what I was talking about with like having like so and but and at the beginning of your sentences. Most of the times if you write like I feel this, you can just get rid of the I feel and your sentence makes sense still. Like you don't need to change anything. Like you just need to get rid of those 3 words. And I mean, like you just don't need those like qualifiers basically is what we're talking about here. An appeal to readers' values. Writers need to appeal to their audience's values implicitly or explicitly, especially when making a strong argument. Again, I would say don't worry about that too much. You guys are writing these mostly for me, unless you find that you did such a good job you want to share them with other people, right? I'm here to help you. I want you to do well, so I'm sure that whatever you write, like, I'm trying to look at it from the most positive light possible. Arguing a position or roadmap. Choose a topic that matters. Select a topic that interests you and is arguable. Keep an open mind and consider all points of view. Consider your rhetorical situation. Think about your audience, purpose, and medium. Again, audience, me, and whoever you may want to show this paper to. Purpose, get the highest grade possible. And medium, 3 to 5 page essay, right? Tailor your arguments to your audience's needs and expectations. Think about your stance. Reflect on where you're coming from regarding the topic. Be clear about your stance. I'm sure if you've chosen this topic, you probably have a pretty clear stance one way or the other, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have chosen this topic. Consider the larger context. What are other perspectives on the issue? What have others said? What have others said? I think, again, this is the most important thing here, right? That we're considering the larger context. We're taking a look at what the experts have talked about and, why other people think the way you think or don't think the way you think. Consider your language. Adjust your language to your audience's expectations and the context. Again, I think everybody in here has been doing a great job with their, scholarly tones, right? So just keep that up. Consider the medium. Will your position be conveyed in print, online, or via another medium? 3 to 5 page essay will probably be turned in online. Research your topic. Gather diverse viewpoints and evidence to support your position. We've talked a lot about how to do that, right, for the last paper, but all those still apply here. Formulate an explicit position. Once you've done your research, state your position clearly and explicitly. I feel this way about X. I used to say, like, I think that McDonald's should bring back the snack wraps, but they've done that now. I can't use that as a good example anymore, okay? They've taken my argument into consideration. They caved, finally. Bring back the steak, egg, and cheese McDonald's on a bagel. They've done it. Organize and start writing. Be guided by your thesis. Support your reasons with evidence and address counter arguments. Again, we got 4 weeks until this final draft is due, right? So that's a lot of time to work on this. A rough draft is due in 2 weeks. I know we got a lot of class left, but don't hesitate to email me anything if you need help, comments, concerns, questions. I have no problem helping out. Review, get feedback, and revise. Look critically at your draft and see feedback from your peers. Revise accordingly. Writing a position paper involves clear articulation, strong reasoning, and addressing opposing viewpoints. By considering the rhetorical situation, your audience, and the cultural context, you can craft persuasive arguments that resonate.